Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to another special episode of Soldier Speaks English exclusive. And I've got today my friend Tony Gosling. Tony Gosling is an investigative journalist, and Tony is joining us from Bristol today. And Tony's going to introduce himself to you. He's a dissident journalist just like me. And we're going to have some very interesting debate about the great power rivalry between China and the US and how it is impacting our region, South Asia, the UK, and what's actually going on in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tony wanted to ask me that. So definitely we are going to talk. We're going to have a very, very good discussion today, and you will enjoy this and you'll be informed in ways nobody else is going to inform you about, because Tony knows his stuff. Let me tell you that. So before we go on, I would ask Tony Gosling to please introduce himself to you. Tony, over to you. Hello.
Well, look, dissident journalists, right? I think all journalists should be dissident, and I don't like the modern version of journalism, which is the staff journalists who are scared of losing their job the whole time. They're watching their words constantly. Am I going to upset the editor? Back in the day, which is really back from the mid 1990s, before that in the UK, it was understood that a good journalist had to have their own voice and independence. And we find that now really, I think, only amongst freelance journalists. So, for example, even at the BBC, people like John Cole, the political correspondent, Sargent as well, I think he was John Sargent, who was another political correspondent, that you knew when they were on the screen, they were saying what they thought, and if they needed to, they would challenge the establishment view. We don't really get that anymore with the Nick Robinson style Laura Koonsberg on the BBC. Those characters are nothing like what you were just referring to as dissident journalists, because the dissident is the person who is actually rooting for the viewers and the listeners and the readers. That's what journalism should be about. And I think most people reading or watching journalism today can tell in their heart, is this guy really on my side, or is he just doing a job? So I think we can both say that we're working to get to the truth, because there is such a thing as the truth. Lots and lots of attempts to pull the wool over people's eyes, and there are all sorts of sub agendas. So a war that's created for one reason may actually be about something completely different. It may be about mineral resources, and it may be about a covert regime change policy in a neighboring state even. But the journalists today don't really interrogate these things, the mainstream people and the mainstream press, because they know if they do start to interrogate, they lose their contacts in the establishment, and often they lose their jobs too. For example, at Sky News, their chief royal correspondent is actually an army officer. He's a major general in the British Army. This is absolutely appalling that you've got a serving officer, or even if he is semi reservist, this is not on. You see pictures of him in his general army uniform, but there he is talking about the king and how wonderful the king is. And isn't the king is saying this today? This isn't journalism. This is actually advertising. This is like an advertising board on the side of the road saying, buy this soap powder. And it isn't journalism. So it's lovely to join you again, Adil. I think be nice for you to just tell me what you want me to, which area you want me to go into, because we've seen so many important things going on. Obviously, the Trump so-called ceasefire agreement, which may be happening in the Middle East, is key and crucial. We've also seen lots more attempts by the British and others to ramp up the tensions in the Ukraine war. We've seen a fascinating election in Moldova, which is pushing more people towards the EU side and banning pro-Russian political parties in Moldova, which could even possibly turn into another Ukraine, God forbid. But and I know there's been these clashes on the border of Afghanistan and Pakistan, some pretty horrific stuff going on there, which seems to be an attempt to intimidate and maybe to manipulate the public. And who knows what that's really about? But that's your side. So if you just like to grill me about what you want from me.
Yeah, Tony. So Folks, now you know why I introduced Tony Gosling as the dissident journalist to you. I'm sure you've got a fair idea now. And my audience, which is joining us for the first time in the YouTube channel, I'm sure you know. And I get so many requests to bring Tony back so often but then I have to chase Tony, and Tony's quite hard to get, and let me tell you. But because the way he talks and the perspective he brings out, I mean, this is a no holds bar perspective, and definitely a dissident perspective. And dissident perspective is the people's perspective, and the people can tell that he's speaking for us. There's no doubt. So, Tony, coming back firstly to the great power rivalry which is going on between China and the US, and the results, I mean, the Ukraine-Russian war is in a way connected to that great power rivalry. The trade and tariff war is connected with that great power rivalry. The disaster capitalism, which we see as a result of that great power rivalry, is impacting the life of the common folk in the world. Now, who's winning, Tony? What do you think? Who's winning?
Look, it's the World Economic Forum who are winning. It's the owners of capital. It's the owners of these increasingly cartel-like monopolies, which are beginning to really dominate markets in Europe, particularly. I think it's also a bit true in the United States, but particularly Europe. All the major markets, whether it's to do with car manufacturing, right the way down to energy, public utilities like water, gas, electricity. These markets are all becoming dominated by a tiny group of people, and dominating them is this company called BlackRock. And I don't know if you've seen, but Larry Fink, their chief executive, has also been brought in now as one of the top people at the World Economic Forum in Davos. Now, this group has been going for decades, the Davos meetings, and they hold them in Switzerland in January. The reason, I think, is because these meetings are very difficult for the protesters, anyone that wanted to, the anti-capitalist protests, which have been going in Europe for decades, very difficult to protest in Davos because it's freezing cold. It's ice everywhere and snow everywhere. But big business can get in there, can jet in their private jets, and they can be fairly content that there will be very, very few little blockades, protests, or whatever. And at those meetings, they bring in their friendly politicians. I would compare it to something like the Bilderberg conferences, where you've got ex-chief executives of mass media sitting down with royalty, sitting down with energy bosses, and a whole swathe of the most armaments industries, people like General Petraeus, former senior commanders in the NATO armies, and having private discussions. Well, the World Economic Forum is almost like a bit of a more public, glitzy version of that. But there's very much an elite in the West, which is very interested in private ownership. It's not interested really in democracy. In fact, it sees democratic media and democratic political parties as in the way. And so it sits down and it says, well, as we've just seen in the United States, let's take it over with the CBS network. It's just been taken over in the United States by pro-Israel factions, by the Israel lobby, effectively, in the United States. So when they see that a network or a political party is pushing back, is working for the favor of the public, these individuals in the West, this network of power, which is probably best to just look at the World Economic Forum membership. That's where they are. They're incredibly wealthy. They've been lobbying, Adil, as well for many years now for tax breaks. So they're getting more wealthy and more wealthy and more wealthy, these people, as people around the rest of the Western influence world are getting poorer and poorer and poorer. Effectively, this is a Mussolini-style fascist system. So it's corporatism. The idea that big corporations can force policy through, they can get what they. So, for example, here in Britain, we have what they call the bonfire of the planning regulations. So, big companies that want to build student flats here in Bristol, where I'm talking to you from, are getting their planning permission, no problem. You can build the tallest building ever in the city, fill it with little tiny rabbit hutches for students, even though that goes against the old regulations. and off you go. You can get on and do it. And so that's how these big corporations make money, is by, basically tearing up or getting rid of all the blocks that there have been through laws and planning system. In Bristol here, what's happened is most of them, the 5 or 6 individuals who were the chief planning enforcement people, have just been sacked. They've been gotten rid of. And so you get these guys who are just sort of pretending in a way to be like we have, it's very similar to what we have is pretend politicians, people who are just there to sort of read a script, like somebody like Keir Starmer. I don't think he's got any political conviction. He just reads whatever he's told to read the next day. He's provided with a script. Maybe it's even written by AI. So I think that's where we are. I think also in China, I would say with the other great powers in China, the idea is, I think, to create a bit of an illusion that China is as completely separate to the West. They're very different. China is communist, the West is capitalist. They're not really, because China has actually beaten the West at capitalism. It's become much more successful as a business and an innovation hub. I've got friends here in the UK who cannot get, and I'm thinking about one guy who's one of the top nuclear scientists in the world. He cannot get his papers published in British magazines or US magazines. So he goes to China, and they will pay him good money for. But the reason is because the nuclear industry is so powerful and the energy industry is so powerful. They can lobby these journals to keep his information about the dangers of nuclear radiation around power stations, etc., out of the journals. So that's the corruption I think we've got here, the corruption of the justice system as well, where it's possible to get trials. We've just had this big, it's a scandal running in Britain at the moment about the collapse of a China spying trial, where these 2 spies were spying on MPs, and the Labour government has just collapsed the trial. Well, isn't that interesting? Because the Labour government has also announced a ID card scheme, which is almost identical to the Chinese social credit scheme in the way it could roll out in Britain. In fact, there's lots of shared technology. They want to have everybody to do everything in the country here in Britain to have a little ID card. And then, well, what's going to happen down the road is that if you do something wrong, well, your ID card gets taken away and you can't work. This sort of thing. So this is a very similar to the Chinese social credit system. So this is why I look at this trial with great suspicion. So this is a very serious espionage trial. The Chinese spying on British MPs, and yet this government and Jonathan Powell, the security advisor, who was also involved with Tony Blair in creating the illegal Iraq war, they have just pulled the plug on the trial. No, we don't want this. So that suggests to me that this new Labour government is much more friendly behind the scenes with China than it should be. It's a national security issue and a justice issue.
Tony, hold that thought. That is my next question. You see, there's a vast difference between the UK, in fact, is a bridge, or consider itself to be a bridge between the empire, that is the US empire, the soul. It is a unipolar world order still yet. So it's considered itself to be a bridge between the might of the US empire and to the rest of the world. But at the same time, UK is playing a very hard and delicate balancing act, if you may like to call it, in relation to this trial you're talking about, in which the Chinese spies, alleged spies, are getting a free chit, which tells you the British judicial system works with the British establishment. So the priority of British establishment right now seems to be to strike that balance between the US and China and, go on. Because let me quote you an example here. The most recent example in the USA, in America, is an Indian origin diplomat, a very famous guy. He was arrested for spying for China, whereas his name is Ashley Tellis. Ashley Tellis is a very famous guy, and he was meeting Chinese officials or accommodations, and he was arrested. And somebody's saying that it was all, a staged. He was it was a. They're trying to say that, well, he's really not he didn't do all those things, and he was just meeting the Chinese accommodations, and he was. It was all a staged act to put him in trouble by the various intelligence agencies. But the main fact of the matter is that he met the Chinese, and they say he had an envelope, and the envelope wasn't with him afterwards, and that was the trial. So just meeting the Chinese in the US can get a career bureaucrat in trouble. But over here in the UK, you just quoted the trial, which tells you two things: how the British judiciary works, and secondly, that the UK is trying to strike a balance. So is it striking a balance? And do you think they're successful in that? Or do you think it's not a balancing act? It's a far more sinister thing than striking a balance.
Okay, so a deal has clearly been done behind the scenes, and justice should not work like this. I mean, look, at the end of the day, by pulling out a trial, it's a bit like the recent terrorist attack that we had in Manchester at the synagogue. When the police shoot the suspect dead on the scene, there will be an inquest, but there will be no trial. And so the evidence from all sides won't come out. That's the same with this espionage trial, which will no longer happen. And this is, of course, what we need to happen. For justice to be seen to be done. In other words, you've got difference of opinion. The Chinese say no, and they've got their lawyers, these guys who are accused, and the British government says yes, you are spies. And so let's let it go through the court, and may the best man win. So that's the way these things should take place. And what happens when the key suspects are shot dead, as what happened in Manchester, or a trial is collapsed like this deliberately by the establishment, is we never find out what was really going on. And that is not justice. This is really not justice at all. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts about the idea of, so apparently professional police officers not only shooting the guy dead when he didn't have a suicide belt on, actually, it turns out, but also shooting him in such a place where there are areas behind where there are people. And behind a door, it could be people. And there were people. And one of them, the police shot dead, and another one they seriously injured. Now, a professional police firearms officer, I would have imagined, would be trained so that if they are about to shoot somebody and let the bullets fly, they make sure there's no children's playground in the background when they're doing this. And they're thinking, we must be aware of what might happen if some of these bullets go a bit stray. So these are the sorts of things which would come out and could and should come out in a trial of a living person, exactly as with the spying case. And the obvious corollary to draw from the collapse of the case is that there is an international network of friendly pally elites that know that the British government is a soft touch and that we can just do a little deal with Jonathan Powell or whoever it happens to be, the Iraq war criminal who never went to jail, and we can get our way and we can get our guys off. Now, this is what has happened for many, many years, where the mafia and the international elites actually undermine, as has happened in Pakistan with the now military rule there, undermine the rule of law. And I know in Pakistan, for example, the lawyers are very active in trying to fight against this destruction of the rule of law, because what you end up with is effectively in Pakistan and in Britain a kind of feudal system where you've got a few elites that can actually do what they want, and anything that looks like it's about to happen that's not in their interest, they will pull a few strings and they'll get off scot-free. And meanwhile, of course, as we were saying earlier, they are raking it in whilst the population underneath is getting poorer and poorer.
Well, Tony, so far it's a very contentious debate which we are having, but I'll take two key takeaways summarizing this discussion so far. From the first part of our discussion, I believe what you're trying to tell us is that there is a supremacist survivalism streak out there in the world in which the super rich, they just want to survive at the cost of the remaining world. And it is the rest of the world versus the supremacist megalomaniacs who just want to have their way. They don't want to give taxes. They don't want to follow the rules, but they want everyone else to follow the rules. They want to create safe tax havens, safe kingdoms for themselves, like Trump announced 10 safe cities in the US, and like Peter Thiel's idea, and like Elon Musk, he wants to go to Mars to create a new world. So they want to create their own worlds, their own shelters, underground shelters or overground shelters, their own islands. They just don't want to fix the world. They just want their own small little part of the world, and they want AI to serve them, the machines to serve them, and their own private armies. And that is going on. There's no doubt about that. And that is where the end of times fascism comes in. What we are witnessing is end of times fascism, and it is being sold to the rest of the world as the Antichrist is coming. You'll hear certain people like even Thiel saying this: Antichrist is coming. They don't believe in global warming. They want to, stigmatize any movement which is movement for the rights of the people, with movement for the rights of the earth. So yeah, that is going on. That is the first take, as I understand. And secondly, the point coming to the great power rivalry and the role the UK is playing. You did mention that, as per in your opinion, a deal has been struck between the UK and the Chinese, because of which this is going on, right? So the Chinese have got a lot of money at their disposal, and they're investing in it in big numbers in the UK as well. The Chinese can get a 5-year visit visa, even, because they spend a lot of money. So it's good business for the UK. So UK is, trying to tread a balancing act. Yes, you were right about the feudal system in Pakistan and the UK. Us peasants, we are not allowed to speak, because if us peasants will speak, we will face the lawfare. The lawfare is going to get us, because the rich and the government can prevent free speech in the libel tourism capital of the world. And that is only one other thing. There are so many other laws, like the counterterrorism laws, and we are a victim of all those. So we know what we are talking about. But moving forward, I think, Tony, let me give you a counter argument. I think this balancing act is quite successful for the UK. It's working out for them. We don't see it on ground, though. But do you think it's going to work out in the long run for the UK playing this balancing act?
Well, I don't really believe in balancing acts. I think I can understand why diplomats rather like to do that. It smooths over the problems, but what happens is those problems don't go away. I'm more of a dualist, really, which is the Abrahamic way of looking at the world, which is good and evil, and truth and lies. And what I see is the lies gaining a great deal of traction particularly around in the Western media. Particularly to do with the nature of our social problems, and also as to whether our politicians are really acting in a democratic manner anymore. We're offered a bunch of people we don't like as our potential leaders to vote for, parties which are all fundamentally flawed in one way or another. And so what you end up doing is democracy turns into something which is really you're voting for the least bad. Obviously, tactical voting comes into it, particularly in the first past the post system in Britain. But you're looking and saying, well, this guy's terrible, this guy's awful, but this guy's only bad, so we'll vote for the bad guy. And you don't end up with anything that really serves or represents the population. And that's what democracy means. The Greek word, the people rule. And it doesn't matter which system you use, the principle is absolutely key and important. The government serves the people, not the other way around. And so what we've seen over the last 20, 30 years is a total reversal in that. I mean, you've had it in a much more open and overt way with the military takeover and the kicking out of Imran Khan in Pakistan. We had a similar sort of thing go on with Jeremy Corbyn. It wasn't so blatant and obvious, but he was destroyed in 2017 and 2019 by infiltrators, mostly Israel lobby pro-Zionist infiltrators in his own Labour Party. So, I think it doesn't make sense to me to try and do a balancing act unless you have principled politicians, conviction politicians, leading the way, leading the charge, then the people can get behind them. And whatever you think about Vladimir Putin in Russia, his population are behind him. You know, maybe they're being conned by their Russian media. I really don't I don't understand Russian, so I don't watch it, right? But they do support their leadership. In Britain here, we have the lowest ever rating for a prime minister, even just a year after he's been elected. Starmer is minus 44% in the polls in Britain. People just really don't want him. So we've got a situation where Farage, who's only got a few MPs with Reform UK, if there was a general election tomorrow for whatever reason, would be straight in with a vast majority. So we've got politicians who are betraying their voters without even hardly batting an eyelid. So as soon as he comes in with a whole load of policies that were never there in his manifesto. So to get back to your point, if you are going to try and play a balancing act between major powers like the US and China, then you've got to have the integrity and trust of your own population and of the world. And Britain doesn't have that.
Well, Tony, isn't it an unfair comparison once you compare Russia with you're saying they support the leadership, but they got no other option.
Yes, they do. They do have another option. They've got a very strong communist party in Russia, which is the second largest party. If Putin puts a few feet wrong, the Communist Party will take over. And they're not the old Communist Party. They're a much more socialist, pro-government party, which means the government should nationalize industries, that sort of thing. It's more of an industrial capitalism style party. So it's just not true to say that that there are no rivals to Putin. He's constantly watching the communists, and he wants to be one step ahead of them the whole time. So they have, I think, a much more genuine political rivalry and genuine political system. But anyway, whatever you say, he's popular, and that's important. Of course, Imran Khan is popular. Let's have popular people in charge.
Yeah, Imran Khan is in jail because he's popular, but it's a different circumstances. But the Pakistani military establishment is doing the job which Putin is doing in Russia. Is that not the case? And if anybody speaks up, there are political assassinations in Russia quite common, isn't it?
Would you like to name some? I don't know. I don't think there's political assassinations going on. Maybe by outside forces. I don't think that what Putin's generally doing is he's jailing people or exiling them or telling them get out of the country or you're going to jail. The oligarchs, the people we like to sort of embrace in Britain and in London, they know full well if they start interfering in the Kremlin, then they're going to be either jailed or they're going to be booted out of the country by one or other means. So whatever you say, the Kremlin is actually politically in charge, and the Russian population know that.
All right, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm not going to, take this topic any further because we've got so many other things to discuss. Tony, what about this Peace 2025 deal in the Middle East, and what about this culture of appeasement towards President Trump? Everybody's, literally sucking up to him. What's going on, Tony? I was talking to Theo Mullis the day before yesterday, and he was saying, well, this is a new normal. The way he was invited, the way he was welcomed here. There were protests in the streets of London, so he didn't go to the streets of London once President Trump was here, and he instead went to the Windsor Castle, and he was, given the state protocols and everything. But it was quite. It was frankly quite hilarious, to say the least, to see. But the way he was being nominated, and he definitely wants to have the Nobel Peace Prize. But the way the Pakistani puppet prime minister nominated him, that really was a sort of a disgraceful conduct, as per various commentators. But it is a new normal in which. Appeasing President Trump and getting a job done and being very careful around him and being extremely, it's like walking on eggs with him. And it is accepted globally, this culture of appeasement. Where would it take the US and the rest of the Western world, the so-called free world, in the next 3 years of his presidency, do you think? This culture and secondly, the comments about the Peace 2025 conference, or the peace which has been struck in Palestine and Gaza.
Well, look, first of all, it's absurd to suggest that someone can get a Nobel Peace Prize for something that may never actually end up as being peace. We had this in the Northern Ireland conflict in the 1980s and the 1990s, where there was something called a peace process, but it never ever led to peace, and it really wasn't ever intended to lead to peace. Noam Chomsky is very good at explaining this whole idea of having a peace process, which is actually a war process.
Mhm.
And so that's what happened in Northern Ireland. And I actually lived over there during part of this time, during what they call the Troubles. So the idea is you have a whole glitzy, sort of TV stage show about peace. But at the end of the day, are you actually ever going to change the political makeup of and the racism in the Israeli population? And the answer is no. There is still this anti-Arab racism, which is endemic in the laws of now of Israel. So it does seem to me as well that the Israelis are just trying to grasp at straws in order to say, oh, this deal's not going to hold, this deal's not going to hold. And the reason why Trump is so center stage in all of this is very simple. He is Netanyahu's bank manager. The money that's been flowing from the United States is colossal. So it's been for many years around about $3 billion a year. It's kind of Israel. It's a kind of U.S. welfare project. That's what's been going on. The Americans have been paying for everything over in Israel. $3 billion a year going there in aid. And what we've seen since the genocide started in 2023 is that's gone up now with arms supplies, etc. Now up to around about $15 billion a year. So that's why all the eyes are on Trump, because the only person who can really pull the plug on the Israeli war machine and the Israeli political project is a certain Donald Trump. And so that's why everyone's watching what he's up to. I mean, of course, it's important. He actually said, I don't know if you caught this, just before he flew out to Tel Aviv, he actually said, well, I gave him no choice, or he had no choice. Netanyahu had no choice. Now, that's an interesting thing for Trump to say. Well, maybe being a bit bombastic, as he tends to be, but it also may be simply, Adil, that he has said to Netanyahu, stop killing people in Gaza or I'm going to cut the money off. We don't know what's happened behind the scenes, but when he says that Netanyahu has no choice, I think we need to at least potentially take that seriously. That Trump may have said this to Netanyahu. Now, there's also, of course, a lot of money involved in this deal. He's managed to bring in piles and billions of cash from many of the surrounding countries, Egypt, for example, into this peace deal. Qatar, the other Gulf states, they're all backing it with money. And that money will be used to rebuild Gaza. So this is, again, you mentioned it. I will echo your thoughts. Disaster capitalism. Massive amounts of money being made in Gaza from reconstruction. Now, we know there's probably over 100,000 people dead now, innocent people, almost all of them. But this is a price you pay. It's almost like a kind of human blood sacrifice that's taken place so that these companies, these investors can now reconstruct. We must mention Naomi Klein and her book because, this book, The Shock Doctrine, which explains what disaster capitalism is all about. And so this is the sort of stuff you're not getting in the mainstream press. The critiques these days, the mainstream media is not talking. In fact, I remember, I think it was called The News, a Pakistani English language paper. We used to get it on the streets of Bristol here. We got a big Pakistani population. And you know what? The people in Bristol would go down the street to the takeaway and they'd read the news because they know they're getting far better international coverage from that paper produced in Pakistan, PDF sent out around the world. Local people would just print copies of it up and leave it around. We were getting better international information in there than were in any of our London-based media. And that's, to me, it explains quite a lot about the background to some of the confusion about these big the great power rivalries is because a lot of this is being steered from the London editors. And I'll just tell you one thing I discovered for the first time a couple of weeks ago is the word editor. Do you know where it comes from?
Where?
From the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire has editors, because these are, for people that aren't insiders in the press, the editor is the guy that decides everything pretty much. He'll send correspondence on assignments. He'll decide whether something comes to press or whether it doesn't come to air on TV, radio. And they are the key figures in the gatekeepers, if you want, nowadays, in deciding what gets seen and heard and what doesn't. But the editor in the Roman Empire was the guy who financed the tournaments in the old amphitheaters, the big Roman amphitheaters where they used to have gladiatorial tournaments. The editor was sitting there like this, and he was the guy who'd financed this. And it would be some of his people who'd come in and fight and kill the criminals if they really were criminals, probably innocent Christians most of the time. But the point here is he decided on life and death in there. So the gladiator would hold the knife up over the guy he was about to kill in the Roman Empire, and he'd look up to the editor, do I kill him or not? And the editor would say yes or no. So he keeps his life. If the thumb is up, he keeps his life. If the thumb is down, he dies. So this was the origin of that term. And they were, of course, the gatekeepers of society. They knew whether somebody was going to be reprieved or whether they were going to be executed by their system. And so in a way, he was a sort of unofficial justice and magistrate. But the whole thing in those days, of course, was entertainment. And in fact, that's what I think much of our media has become. It's become a sort of entertainment factory where you've got to get involved. And I think it's Brian Eno, the musician, the pop musician, famous guy. He produced David Bowie and people like this. He calls it propaganda. Propaganda is steering the public mind. And they've been doing this, I think, ever since really the turn of the century. There's been a very strong element of, right, we're going to spin it this way and everyone will think what we do. But actually, of course, as you and I know, much of this is, well, people are getting their news from elsewhere. I mean, we used to in the noughties from the news, in the takeaways. But people are getting their information from social media, from people like you as well nowadays. So it ends up that the way they're trying to steer all this ends up being for the stupid people, the people who don't realize that they're being entertained. This is a kind of machine which is entertaining you, drawing you off into the wrong direction. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but to me, the editors are really culpable. We had, for example, in the Second World War, there were two major magazines, newspapers in Nazi Germany who were really pushing the hatred for Jews, blaming Jews for everything. They were extremely, obviously, very, very pro-Hitler, or really very racist, etc., and lots of lies about, the idea was to steer people, obviously, and to control the public mind. And Julius Streicher was one, Alfred Rosenberg was another. In 1946, they were both executed for complicity with the war crimes. And it was seen in those days, as I think it should be now, that these editors of newspapers and magazines should be responsible for complicity with war crimes. So, my attitude is I want peace, I want truth. And if I'm in any way making things, pushing an agenda which is pro-war crimes agenda, I will apologize for that. But I don't think I do it at all. But there are people out there who have sold their souls, Adil, as you know, and will tell the public whatever they want. And I think these people should be considered as war criminals and potentially in the future put on trial, particularly in relation to the genocide that we've seen going on in the Middle East.
So, Tony, we have actually concluded that we are living in an era of disaster capitalism in which all is fair in war and no love, an era of no love. And that is where you were asking me what's happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Well, Tony, let me tell you, as per my sources, allegedly, the Pakistani army chief who's actually ruling the country, Asim Munir, He's promised President Trump that he'll carry out a regime change operation at Afghanistan and he'll remove the Taliban government. It was a different faction of Taliban, of course. We're going to listen to him, and he's going to get him back the Bagram air base, from which we have heard President Trump, once he was here in the UK, that we are trying to do something to get the Bagram air base from where we can reach the Chinese nuclear facility in 1 hour. But the Afghans are not willing to give, they've fought the superpowers, and it is a graveyard of empires, as President Trump would himself like to mention so many times. But definitely, it is my personal belief, and as per my information, it is the Pakistani military chief, the field marshal he's so seemingly fond of, who has told him that I'm going to get you the regime change in Afghanistan, which is beyond his reach. That's not going to happen as per the current circumstances, but they're definitely trying to do that. The Pakistani intelligence, ISI, is trying to carry out a regime change operation. They have conducted drone strikes. They've killed innocent people there. They blame Afghanistan for terrorism, insurgency in Pakistan, whereas Pakistan has got a far superior military, far superior force, and these people are basically indigenous. The Pakistanis, the different insurgent groups are fighting in Pakistan against state oppression, and they've got political motives, political agendas, and they've been fighting there for ages now. Afghanistan is being blamed to, because there are divided tribes issues. There are same tribes living across the border, which was the Durand Line. Once it was a colonial empire, but was once called India, the United India. But later on, it was called the Pakistan International Border. The Afghans still call it the Durand Line. They've tried to fence the border with their almost $500 million fencing project. It didn't work for them. Well, these people, they are living in Pakistan and they travel freely to their brothers in Afghanistan. But if that is the reason insurgency and terrorism is happening in Pakistan, then why Pakistan is unable to control it, whereas they're openly and they're fearlessly striking Afghanistan through drone strikes, they're sending in fighter aircraft as well, but they're unable to control it. At the heart of this crisis lies the alleged promise by the Pakistani military chief, Asim Munir, as per my sources, that he has promised this regime change in Afghanistan, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Clive Stafford Smith, leading British human rights lawyer, was there in Kabul the other day, and I had a chat with him once he was at Kabul. We had a meeting. We had this interview, and he was of the opinion that Afghanistan in the days of the previous regime of Hamid Karzai was and once the US was there and the NATO was there and the International Security Assistance Force was there, there was no peace there. There was no security there. He couldn't move around because he's been going to Kabul frequently to represent Afia Siddiqui case, gathering evidence. But now he says there is peace around. And well, I think as soon as he said it, the Pakistanis attacked. The internet went down there. It's back up again. But at the heart of it, entire conflict is again disaster capitalism, because as per the Chinese sources, they claim that the great power rivalry, at the center of this great power rivalry are the rare earth elements, REE, or the critical minerals. And the Pakistanis have promised that to the Americans. And the Chinese see the Pakistani military establishment as backstabbing them. The Chinese think that they are being backstabbed by the Pakistanis because they have invested $60 billion in China-Pakistan economic corridor, and now they are going after the Americans. They're inviting the Americans in. But the Chinese sources claim that the actual rare earth minerals and the quality rare earth minerals are at Afghanistan, and the Pakistanis want to, be the contractors of that rare earth elements. Traditionally, they've had a hold in Afghanistan, and they've had friendly governments in Afghanistan, and they've been conducting regime change operations at Afghanistan successfully previously. So they believe that they can still do it by creating pressure amongst the various groups of Taliban who are ruling that country. So that is actually at the heart of this entire, conflict lies the rare earth elements, and that is why the Pakistani military regime is trying to conduct the regime change operation.
But I
And
mean, look, we've got a problem. We've got a real problem here in that actually the Pakistani military regime, Munir and the rest of them, they can't even control their own country. There is terrorist attacks going on in Pakistan, and so they think that they can just brush that under the carpet and they can go off on some little mission to a neighboring country to do a bit of dirty work for the Americans. I mean,
exactly.
to me, this is a symptom of a dysfunctional and corrupt regime. You need to get your own house in order before you start throwing stones at your neighbors.
That's true. That's true, Tony. With this thought, and I believe that that is why they won't be successful in this operation. And so far, it has only been MOUs, the Memorandum of Understanding between the U.S. and Pakistan, whereas the Pakistani regime is spending $600,000 per month for lobbying in Washington D.C. It's a broke country, which is living, whose economy is surviving on one bailout to another, and they are spending $600,000 per month, and these are far declaration on lobbying in the U.S. to appease President Trump. But Trump is not giving any money to them. Trump is a businessman. He doesn't. He makes profit. He's taking money from these countries, from his client states. He's not putting the money back in. And well, the Chinese have also squeezed their money. They've also, stopped investing in non-productive, projects in Pakistan. So the present military regime is in a bit of trouble, but they don't really care because they've got an entire country at their disposal. A few 100,000 being killed in climate disasters or terrorism, as you say, really doesn't bother them. They've got a country of 250 million. I'm giving you their psychology.
Well, look, one thing I really don't understand is why do the Pakistani military junta, why are they siding with the Americans, not the Chinese? The Chinese are much closer by, and they seem to be way superior in terms of weapons and financial clout, etc. It seems to make sense, in technology, in weapons technology, etc. For the Pakistanis to be aligning themselves with China, not the United States. What are they playing at?
Yeah, well, Tony, here the personal interests of few generals supersede the national interests of the country, Pakistan, because the generals and their children, they are here in the Western world. They're either here in the UK or in the USA. They've got their properties, estates in the Western system. They like to settle in either in Australia or in the UK or in Europe somewhere or in America. So they and their children, and they are billionaires themselves. They're making so much money because they have got their own business empires. They're controlling the businesses of the country. So they make lot of money, and they shift that money to the Western capitals, and it is in their control. So by controlling them, the US is controlling Pakistan, and their personal interests are aligned with the Western world, not
so
with
they're selling their country out. They're selling their country out for cronyism. Yeah, of course. So I think because of the phenomenon of Imran Khan, we really ought to. I must ask you what you think he would do, because we still have him in our hearts. We still think about him regularly. We see him. I think most people around the world actually see him as the legitimate leader. So what do you think he would be doing now?
Well, he would say absolutely not, and he will put an end to it, and that's why he's in jail, Tony.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you think it's possible for Pakistan? Do you think it's possible for Pakistan to survive as an independent nation with friendships with China and the United States, but no absolute loyalty, and to not sell the country out?
Well, Tony, till the time the Pakistani military is, they're ruling, and till the time personal interest of these few generals and their allied politicians will supersede, will overcome the national interest of the country. Until the time the people of Pakistan voted for Imran Khan, but the elections were rigged. The Commonwealth election observation mission and the
Yeah,
European
yeah.
Union election observation mission noted it down, but the reports were suppressed. They were not. The Commonwealth report came out through a whistleblower, and the European Union report is still not coming out because the Pakistani military is providing ammunition for the Ukraine war.
Ah,
So they've
right.
got strategic leverage over it, and they're playing these different strategic leverages to maintain their hold over Pakistan and keep democracy at the back burner. And the Western countries, they stay quiet about it, because even in the Western countries, you've got the far right, right now holding a disaster capitalism, and the top tech billionaires and the megalomaniacs, they're ruling the country, but they're ruling the world right now. So till the time those who support liberal democracy, they are till the time they're not in control, we really can't do anything much about it but raise awareness about it. It's a global issue right now, but the Pakistanis, right, they do want change, they do want democracy, and democracy is the way forward, peace is the logical way forward, and the people's representation must be respected. And well, what else can I tell you, Tony? The reports, it's evident the elections were rigged, but the Western governments are quiet because, it's not in their interest, in their national interest, to take on the Pakistani military establishment to task who control that country. But in Pakistan, you will see politicians, you will see most of people who are at the helms of affair to prioritize their personal interest over the national interest. So yeah, that is a serious issue, and it has to till the time you will see this issue, till this time you'll see this situation unresolved. Till the time it stays unresolved, there won't be any change in that country. You will see that the country, and it is a nuclear country, mind you, and it's a nuclear country getting destabilized. I'm telling you, Tony, there are dozens of fatalities in the armed forces. Me being a former Pakistan Army officer, I know this. There are dozens of fatalities per day. Till what time do you think you would be able to sustain and manage this this rain of blood and terror? You won't be able to, and it's going to burst. And the Western capitals, which are playing the pigeon, thinking the cat won't eat them, the cat would ultimately come and eat them.
Well, what, as we say, the chickens will come home to roost. It's inevitable, and they're setting the country on a terrible course. I mean, I think we ought to also say something. It's not what anyone wants to hear, but with the Israel-Gaza situation, the Israelis have been finding any little excuse to say, no, the ceasefire's finished. They've been killing people, which they're not supposed to be doing, obviously, in Gaza. And we've also got this attempt to disarm Hamas, even though many of the people who are supposed to be released have not been released by the Israelis. So this is almost falling apart before it's been born, this deal. Obviously, there's been a ceasefire, there's been food getting in, but we're now hearing from Trump just in the last day that he wants to violently disarm Hamas because they're not laying down their weapons. Well, this is got to be a process of building trust, and it seems like now Trump has flown back home. He's not interested in building trust anymore. And you can see why people in Gaza might be a bit cynical about what's been going on. I mean, many of them don't support Hamas, and yet they're being killed by the Israelis for harboring Hamas. And this is being used as a word to sort of make out that the people fighting in there are all one and they all deserve to die. It really is just an excuse for a genocide. So I'm really concerned that this is going to break down. We need some prayers for peace there. And also, I'd just like to share with you my knowledge of the end of the troubles in Northern Ireland, how that peace process was brought to an end, because it was by that time, it was in the 1990s, the John Major government, it was all still going on. The British government had just refused to properly negotiate to cause a peace with the loyalists on the one side over there, the Protestants that you might call them, but they were really mainly loyal to the UK, the Orange Lodges, etc., versus the Catholics and the IRA. And there was an attempt to get the IRA to disarm, but the IRA quite obviously said, well, we need to be able to trust you first. And they kept trying to get the IRA to disarm, but the UVF and the loyalists were carrying on with the campaigns, and the British Army was very much involved through Army Intelligence, the Force Research Unit, in actually carrying out terrorist attacks itself. So this was a major problem. Now, I say major, it was the John Major government, but the way it was ended eventually, the IRA stopped doing any of these sectarian attacks, just killing people in loyalist communities, etc., which they hadn't been doing many of anyway. The loyalists had been really behind most of the sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. What they started doing was giving telephoned warnings and bringing massive truck bombs into the city of London. And over the period of about 2 years, in the late 1990s, they bombed the British government to the peace table by giving phone warnings. So hardly anyone was killed in these attacks, but there was hundreds of millions of pounds, even billions of pounds worth of property damage done. Places like Baltic Wharf, Canary Wharf, where entire buildings had every single window smashed by a massive bomb. Everyone had been managed to get out. They gave us something like a half-an-hour warning, and a massive tipper truck full of explosives then blew up. And by doing this, the IRA actually forced the British government to lay down the true negotiating position on the table. And then we had the Northern Ireland Agreement, the peace process, the Good Friday Agreement, in 1998, and everything started to calm down. The British Army had a few problems because it wasn't able to train urban live warfare anymore, which they rather liked over in Northern Ireland. And so I think maybe there are some lessons to be gained from the way that this was eventually ended. Was very little bloodshed, but a lot of property damage to the antagonist side, which actually was the British Army and the loyalists. And of course, it was the British Army that started the trouble in the first place with, if anyone knows their history, with what was called Bloody Sunday, when the Parachute Regiment soldiers shot unarmed demonstrators in Londonderry or Derry, who were demonstrating for civil rights. And that was really what forced the hand of the Republicans to take up arms against the British Army. So, there are maybe some lessons to be learned, because I think this is a similar sort of conflict going on in Gaza, where it's being framed as a Muslim versus Jewish conflict. I don't think it's anything of the sort. It's actually a settler colonialist project started by the British and carried on with help from lots and lots of Russian Jews were brought down. Many of German Jews, of course, who were getting worried about Adolf Hitler in the 1930s, were brought down to Israel, and the British helped create the State of Israel in 1948. It is much more of a settler colonial project. It's almost like a kind of colonial outpost fortress in the Middle East, rather than anything really to do with religion. And of course, what's the second commandment, or the third commandment? I think it is no idols or whatever. But anyway, thou shalt not kill. And of course, they're not obeying this at all. They are treating people like Adolf Hitler did, as Untermensch, under people. These people, their lives are worth nothing, and so we're just going to sweep them out of the way for the property developers and Trump and his friends. So that's what I think it's important to say something about that conflict, because it doesn't look as if, or with all this pomp and ceremony, we're going to get any kind of lasting peace, which is a terrible tragedy. But that's what we get, of course, all the time from the mainstream media. They'll sell you something. This is wonderful. This is brilliant, without the critical voices like people like you and I.
Well, our message is quite clear, and our message is that peace is the logical way forward, and we are working for peace. And peace through consensus means democracy, and we are working for democracy. It might not be a perfect system, but wishes of the common people must be observed. They must be heard. It is our human right, and we are working for human rights. Thank you so very much, ladies and gentlemen. Tony Gosling, thank you.
Thank you, Adil. Thank you very much.